You're listening to The Portfolio Composer, hosted by me, Dr. Garrett Hope, where business and creativity go hand in hand. Join us at theportfoliocomposer.com for news, talks, and workshops. This episode is brought to you by Dorico, the music notation software from Steinberg. Dorico Pro 3 is a major new version with game-changing advances in note input, notation, and engraving. Also available from Steinberg is Dorico Elements, an entry-level application that packs all of the essential power of Dorico Pro into a simple, streamlined package that is ideal for those getting started. Find out more later in the show. Welcome to the Portfolio Composer, where creativity and business go hand in hand. Today's episode is with composer Matt Morton. Matt is an award-winning composer, multi-instrumentalist, and engineer-producer from Columbus, Ohio. He started on guitar at age 9 and went on to learn the bass, piano, drums, mandolin, quattro, charango, ukulele, banjo, and cello. He's played in multiple bands and has scored award-winning movie scores, including Apollo 11, which we're going to spend time talking about today. He's a fascinating guy. We dig deep into his portfolio and how teaching allowed him to become a better composer and why he still maintains a teaching studio today and what that does for his business. There's lots of rewarding content in here. Enjoy. Matt, welcome to the Portfolio Composer. It's a pleasure to speak with you today.
Oh, thanks so much for inviting me.
So as I just explained to you before we started rolling tape here, the idea of the podcast is that we as creative individuals have to have a portfolio of income-producing activities because most of us don't have traditional jobs, and the idea of traditional jobs is going away. So I want to just start this interview by asking you, what is in your portfolio? What are all the things you're doing to make a living as a creative individual?
Well, currently, I'm primarily composing for film, and there are a number of income streams involved with that. You get an upfront composing fee. You may or may not retain the publishing share of your music that you create. You generally do retain your artist share, although there are some movements in the industry currently, most notably with the Discovery Channel and their subsidiaries, where they are making composers from here on out, they're kind of forcing people, if they want to work with them, to sign off all their rights. So anyway, that's another probably part of the discussion. But, depending on who you're working with and what your bargaining power is, you might be able to get points on the back end, like profit participation. If the film turns a profit, then you might be able to get some percentage points on the back. And that's going to be most of the stuff for composing. I also I've been teaching guitar and bass and uke and songwriting and recording and whatnot since 2003, around the same time that I set out to be a composer. I was kind of making a transition from being a live musician to composing mainly for film and web films and TV and that kind of stuff. And that was really great. At one point, I was teaching, over 40 students a week. And
wow, it's a lot.
Yeah. But there's a reason why Mozart and Beethoven and all those guys, for hundreds of years, music creators have turned to teaching. And it's got a little bit of a negative stigma to it because a lot of people say, oh, if you can't do, then you teach. But I think that's a terrible way to look at it.
Yeah.
I think that it's made me a much better composer. When you're first starting out, you have to have a day job pretty much, unless you're a trust fund baby, I guess. But I'm not that. So I needed a way to make money. And I was a temp. I worked at Lowe's as a lumber cashier. I worked at Panera, pouring coffee and toasting bagels and stuff. And then I started teaching. I was like, wow, I can make way more money,
right?
4 times the money, and be paid to dissect songs and figure out how song structures, different chord progressions and arrangements and production strategies, how all that works, and be kind of kept up on what's happening in music right now. What are people listening to of all ages? I teach from 7 to over 70 years old. So teaching was almost like a secret to my success, not only money-wise, but also just in helping me kind of sharpen my tools and build my craft.
I'm so glad you said that, Matt, because I'm often advocating people to teach. I live in Nebraska, but even where I live, I can charge $60 an hour lesson or more.
Yeah.
And if you live in a major city, you can almost double that.
Right.
And you can't make that in any kind of retail job ever.
Right. Yeah. Unless you're a licensed electrician or something like
Right.
that.
Yeah.
And, when you're teaching music, typically you don't have to start until the afternoon, which is real great. That leaves your morning open for composing, or if you perform live, and you get home at 3 or 6 or whenever you do, you'll be able to get some sleep in before you start teaching. It's a really great way to go, for sure.
Yes, definitely.
And it's modular too. As you get busier, you can scale back.
Yeah.
I've had over 50 students before, and now I have 3 because I really am hanging on to those last ones. One, because the 3 that I have left, one is a composing mentee. The other one is, I've been teaching him for over 10 years, and we're just as close as family almost. And the other one didn't leave me when I had to take lots of breaks finishing up some of my composing things. So those 3 have stuck with me through thick and thin. So I continue to do it. I feel like it gives me so much back in inspiration and just feeling fulfilled that I never want to stop. I know I might have to at some point, but I feel like if I got hit by a car, later today or something, I feel like some of the impacts that I've had in people's lives as a teacher, or even just a, caring ear to listen to their troubles, like a bartender, or a hairstylist or something. I feel like that's almost more significant than any kind of flashy awards or anything that I've won. So anyway.
Right. Well, it's important that you have those high quality clients too. You and I could probably tell a gazillion stories about students who don't practice, and you basically have to fire the student. But when you have someone who wants to be there, works hard, and they make it rewarding for you too, it's a joy then to spend your time with them.
Certainly is. Yeah. A half hour can feel like it lasts 3 minutes, or it can feel like it lasts 3 hours, depending on. You can only get as far as the boat can go using the wind in the sails from the student,
Yeah.
And it's powered by their enthusiasm and their work. You're there as a guide, and especially the way that I teach, I always I tell them, I'm very good at transcribing music quickly. So I tell them, you pick any song that you want, anything that's going to make you practice, anything that inspires you. Why did you pick the guitar up? Why did you want to take lessons? If it's, some cartoon theme song, that's cool. If it's, I'm a Barbie girl. Okay, sure. Let's learn that. It's usually not those, but
Right.
I've taught all kinds of stuff. I have thousands of pages of music transcribed over the years. And, I'm really baffled sometimes when students are just like, yeah, I don't really listen to music much. And I'm like, okay, why are you here?
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, it's got to come from the student, and it's your job to inspire them. You can lead a horse to water though sometimes. So
Sometimes.
yeah.
I do want to follow up on your comment about how you feel like teaching has made you a better composer. You actually used the phrase, it's sharpened your skills. Can you dig into that a little bit more for me?
Sure. I would liken it to sometimes if you go to an art gallery or a museum and you see an artist set up with an easel or maybe just a sketchbook or something, and they're trying to copy a masterwork on the wall. A lot of times I've encountered songs that I've heard, 100 times in my life, like a Beatles song or whatever. And you feel like you know it until you actually sit down and try to write down every detail of what's happening as accurately as you can. And then you start to really see all of the work and the genius of the craft. It's never as simple as you think. And often the more times you've heard a song, the more stumbling blocks you have in your way, because you feel like, oh, I don't need to listen to this a bunch of times before I start writing. You start writing what you've constructed in your mind as your internal model of what that song is. But so often I will write stuff down in that kind of a situation and then go back later and be like, no, that does not match what's actually happening. I think that until you kind of walk a mile in their shoes, you can't really know a song. or a piece of music. The devil is in those details.
Hmm.
And I've learned that lesson over and over again. I know I'm spewing a bunch of cliches in a row, but the whole measure twice, cut once. I mean, I use this software called the Amazing Slowdowner to transcribe with.
Oh, I know that software.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah.
And I've got all the shortcuts mapped to the number keys on my keyboard. So it's basically like it allows you to slow down music with a really great algorithm so you can hear everything very clearly. It's also got great tools for, taking a stereo file and flattening it to mono, which is really good if you're trying to figure out something that's panned in the center, like, a bass line or, a lead guitar thing. If you're trying to figure out keyboards or guitar parts, they're often panned out in the sides. So there's a karaoke button that will cancel everything in the middle and just leave you things that weren't panned equally into both speakers. So that typically gets rid of the kick drum, the bass,
lead vocal.
Yeah, lead vocal, all that stuff that's, not what I'm aiming for. It's got a button to transpose up and down octaves. So a lot of times if you're transposing bass, I will flatten it to mono and then I'll bump it up an octave. And a lot of times, it makes those bass frequencies a lot easier to hear, especially if, the bass player's playing on like a 5-string or something. Our ears just don't work as well down there. But anyway, I think I'm getting a little too far into the weeds as usual. But what was the original?
How has digging into this stuff helped you improve as a composer?
Oh, yeah. Okay. Thank you. Well, you can learn something from any piece of music. It doesn't matter if it's your particular style. You can have respect for a songwriter or an artist and not necessarily want to pop that music into your car stereo when you're, heading to Chipotle or something. You can take the way that they structured their song. You can learn a lot from song structures. Do they start with the hook? Is it a verse chorus structure where the chorus is repetitive and the verses change? Or is it like a verse bridge structure? Is it, you start to see chord progressions very, very commonly used, 1, 4, 5 progressions. That's like Louie Louie or Hang On Sloopy or Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. Those are all 1, 4, 5 progressions. And no matter what key you play it in, it always has that really upbeat, happy, propulsive type of effect to it. The 2-5-1 progression in jazz, you start to see these, you build up this vocabulary, this bag of tricks of different chord progressions that you can go to when you need a certain type of effect in a cue, or, if you're producing an artist. And, you start to notice things like, oh, okay, to get more energy in a chorus, they'll bring in a string pad. And then when that goes away, and when the verse starts, then you feel that energy drop. The tempo didn't drop, but the energy dropped a little bit because, they had different instruments playing in one section and not in the other. So you can apply pop production tricks to the orchestra or vice versa, or any type of instrumentation you're using. There's just so much to be learned by rolling up your sleeves, trying to transcribe music the best that you can. You just learn so many tricks, and the tricks are not evident by just listening to the music. Definitely, if you don't spend time as a composer, really putting the microscope to pieces of music that you love, then you should, because you really, there's a lot to be gleaned from that. Or, just following along with a score.
Yeah.
Take your favorite 30 seconds of, Beethoven's Seventh, the Allegretto or something like that. I love that piece. And just see, okay, why is this working? Is it because, the celli are, high in their range? Is that why the energy's coming across? What's going on? Who's doubling the violins? Is it the flutes? Is it, whatever? It requires more energy if it's already been transcribed, I think, because you have to actively analyze all this stuff. If you have to do the transcribing, I feel like it's easier to make the discoveries. It's easier to look over the details if it's all written out for you. But anyway, there's a lot to be found in the details. And I'd say you could even learn more from just taking one movement of one symphony and just really pouring over it than you could by, listening to the collected works of a whole composer. Well, I don't know. It's apples and oranges.
Sure.
But yeah, I found a lot just in the details.
Listening to you describe, like, picking apart some popular music examples reminded me of this book I read a long time ago, but it's called The Producer as Composer.
Mm-hmm.
And it's actually an academic book, but it's looking at popular music and how the producer or the production techniques used by the producer really are compositional techniques. And they're looking at what George Martin did and Phil Spector and Brian Wilson. I mean, they're going back almost 60 years at this point. But there's a lot of value there for the contemporary composer. And that's exactly what you're just saying.
Absolutely. I mean, all of those producers that you mentioned are huge influences on me. I think that the Beatles were probably my first entree into orchestral music and how powerful all those instruments can be. A lot of people might look at orchestral or band instruments, the kind of traditional stuff, and just be like, oh, that's lame. It's not cool like a synth or an electric guitar or something like that. But just listening to the Beatles, you can hear, they could take a guitar track and, like Eleanor Rigby with I think it's a double string quartet on that. And it just makes that song.
Oh, yeah.
And to your point about the way that you produce a track being part of the composition process, I completely agree. I typically will be the writer, the orchestrator, the performer, the recorder, and the mixer. I did that for Apollo 11. I also did that for Dinosaur 13. I'm literally the only person on the score, but I also am the one mixing. And I can tell you, man, hundreds of times I've played through all those cues, and the mixing is not done until I've listened through to the whole thing with the dialogue and sound effects of the film playing against it. And anytime I heard if something was buried or if there were things fighting with the dialogue, or I just didn't agree with the balance of the instruments, I'd hit stop, fix it, listen again. And then maybe the next time I get, 12 seconds further and then I hear another thing, boop, nope, stop, fix it, go back, do it again. And I'm sure that there will be a time when I need to delegate more of the mixing and production sides of things. But, I'd prefer to keep working this way if I can. I'd love to use more live musicians than I do, but I really do love the compositional aspects of mixing and production. I'd say I'm almost as interested in recording and all the nerdy, recording techniques as I am in, what instruments to use and what notes are they playing and stuff.
Sure.
If somebody took my musical ability away, I could happily go be an engineer or a mixer or something like that. So,
well, good thing that's not a possibility. Can't quite do that.
Yeah, but I think that a modern composer needs to. I didn't set out to be a composer when I was young. I just wanted to be in a band. But then I started to realize, I just started on guitar actually, and I wish my curiosity could be fully captured by just being an instrumentalist of one instrument. I feel like my life would be a lot easier. It would like kind of trim out all of the, potential distractions, I guess you could say. But I just, I think as a guitar player, I started to realize, wow, what I play is very impacted by what the bassist plays. And the bassist needs to lock in with the drums. And we all need to be listening to each other. And then how, what's the volume of that vocal over top of it? And how did they mic everything? All of these things, you start to get a sense of how production choices have gigantic effects on the final product. And it blows my mind. A lot of composers are just like paper and pencil, and, the only instruments they use is the orchestra, and they don't have any idea about, how a ribbon mic sounds different than a condenser, and, and then differences in between those types of mics, and, what kind of preamps sound like this and whatnot. But I've just always looked at that not as like, oh man, more stuff I have to learn. It's, if anything, it's like, man, that just widens the palette, and these are all colors I can use.
Right.
Like, you know?
This episode is sponsored by Dorico, the future of scoring. And we want to feature real Dorico users so you can know that real composers out in the world today are using Dorico to make their careers happen.
My name is Homayun Kazemi. I'm a composer. I'm studying my master's degree in the Utrecht Conservatory in Holland. I study spectralism, and I combine Iranian music, melodies, and a lot of stuff from my culture. There are these quarter tones that you can use. The fact that Dorico can play these quarter tones. The magic for me is parts. I hate making parts, but Dorico is like, hey, I will do it for you. Usually, like 90% of the time, it's what you want. And then you just do a little bit modification, and then that's it. And that saves a lot of time. Even the print, even like I showed one of my teachers a print, and then he was like, wow, this is different. I mean, even the print looks different, you know, the fonts and I maybe the DPI or something, I don't know, but it looks really good on paper as well. For contemporary composers and people who want to do graphic notation, Dorico is now going into it. It's the beginning, but even now it's really good. Yes, I would definitely recommend Dorico. One of the main reasons and the first reason to get Dorico is the price, which is really good. And also you get a lot of features. You get the sample library, you get the ease of making parts because it saves a huge amount of time. When you're composing or when you're working, you don't really have to think about finding things. If they're just there, you just have to have a general knowledge about the shortcuts and the whole tab system, and then it will go great.
The kind folks at Dorico have set up a special web page so you can go and download a free 30-day trial copy of Dorico. So go and do that. I have been using the program and I'm absolutely in love with it. Go to www.steinberg.net/TPC. How has that affected you from a business perspective? And I know that you started your own production company, Studio 651, right?
Yes.
And you're wearing all these hats.
It's really just an LLC to kind of protect me, you know, personally.
Tell me about that. Why did you feel like you needed to get that legal entity, that protection?
Well, you know, LLC is limited liability corporation. Mm-hmm. And the idea there, you know, even if you're just a guitar teacher and you're not a, you know, producer or composer or anything, it's a way that if you were to be, say you have, you know, a wife and a house and some kids or something, if someone accused me of plagiarizing a film cue, or if they slipped and fell on the way into a guitar lesson or something like that, if I didn't have an LLC, they could sue me and my wife for all of our possessions. But if you firewall off the business part of your life financially, legally, and even just physically, you know, you designate how much of your, you know, for me, I have, my wife and I live in Columbus, Ohio. We have a finished basement, and it's, you know, X number of square feet of our house. That is basically just used for my corporation. I have an LLC, and I've got, you know, liability insurance in case somebody does slip on the stairs on the way down, or, you know, if anything happens with my business and its assets are at risk, but not our house or our cars or anything like that. So as long as you keep everything as separate as you can, it should afford a little bit of protection. Now, they can still do what's called piercing the veil of the corporation, mm-hmm. which means, you know, if you're a sole proprietor, they can argue that basically, yeah, you're saying that you're doing business as this entity, but really it's just you, isn't it? You know? So luckily, I haven't had that protection around me tested yet, knock on wood. But yeah, that was just a decision early on.
Yeah.
And, you know, filmmakers do the same thing too. They typically create an LLC for each movie or film or documentary or whatever you want to call it that they do. And that way, you know, all of the agreements that they make with the production team and with their distributors, they all flow through that LLC. All the finances flow in and out of that LLC. You know, it gets its own tax ID number. It, you know, files for taxes at the end of the year separately. And it just compartmentalizes and firewalls you off from, if worst case scenarios happen, and, they do sometimes.
Yeah. Well, that's why we have it. It's like an insurance policy.
Exactly.
Yep.
Exactly. And I definitely recommend insurance.
Oh, me too. Yeah, I'm set up as an LLC as well. I think if you treat your business like a business all the time, it's harder for them to pierce the corporate veil.
Right.
But if you just treat it as like a bank account for you to just do whatever you want out of, then it really does look like you're just a sole proprietor.
Right. Yeah.
And so there's good business practice to make sure your business really is a separate legal entity from you. And that's how the government's going to see it. There's you, and then there's the business, and they're two separate things.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
You reminded me how each production on like a film studio, they'll create small companies, one for each film and business. And I had forgotten about that. But that actually helps them with their accounting in the same way that creating a business would help you with your accounting too, taxes and everything at the end of the year.
Yep. It also helps if you're a composer or a songwriter. It also behooves you to set up a publishing company to act as a rainwater gatherer of your royalties, the publishing side of your royalties. So
talk to me more about that. I mean, I have with ASCAP, I'm registered as a publisher with them, so I can get my publisher royalties and my writer royalties.
Yep.
But I don't have a separate publishing company as a legal entity. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, but I just use it as a division of my LLC, basically. So it still flows into the LLC, but I just name the publishing company as a division of that there. But having yourself set up as a publisher and not just as an artist enables you to enter into publishing and co-publishing deals with other artists, or it leaves you a little more flexible, as I understand it.
Sure. What does that mean to actually have a publishing company? Because we're not talking about traditional printing and binding of paper goods publishing. This is the other kind of publishing.
Right. And, honestly, it's almost like, I bought a supercomputer and I only use it to check my email. Like, if you could make a whole career out of having a publishing company, and you could go out there and you could do deals with other songwriters, and you could offer them money in return for the publishing side of their compositions. And so it's basically like an investment that you make in their catalog, or, you believe that they're going to write a great song, and that money that you're giving to them as an advance is going to be recouped. And hopefully you'll turn a profit on that because they're going to write such a good song, and you're going to get the publishing side of the royalties. I don't ever exercise it that way. I'm the only writer who's ever been published by Studio 651 Publishing. But when I was getting everything set up, 20 years ago or whatever, that was the main way that BMI wanted you to set it up, so that you would get those publishing royalties that, that they would find their way to you, basically. Because I didn't enter into any publishing deals with anyone else.
It's also very complicated, isn't it?
The way I do it, I guess it's pretty easy. To get filed in as a publisher is just, it's a one-time fee, and then you do the application, and then you're set up. It was infrastructure that I created back then just so that if certain, business opportunities arose, or, if I got some hit movie on TV or something, I wouldn't have to scramble and get it done. I was just trying to be proactive. And so it's kind of like a set it and forget it thing. It's not too bad. And, at the end of the year, BMI or ASCAP or CSAC or whoever is your PRO will send you, an end of the year summary, and shows you how much your domestic and foreign royalties were, and you file all that with your CPA, and you're good.
Yeah. So you said something interesting right there, filing it with your CPA. So what kind of team have you built around your business so that you can be successful at the main job, which is writing music?
Up until this point, it's mainly been me. I've added a couple team members here recently, but one thing I would say to anyone out there, whether they're a composer or just in a band, or, even if they're making clay pots and selling them at, on weekends somewhere, it's very important to, report your income so that you can then also report all of your business costs and start to establish the idea with the IRS and with the government that, hey, you really are a business. You can't just expect to use Schedule C on your tax return to claim all these tax deductible expenses, but then never show any of your income on the books.
Right?
I've heard it said, I don't know if it's this way still, but if you claim business status, but then you don't claim a profit, or your income is like kind of suspiciously low, the IRS can declare your business a hobby and retroactively wipe out all of those tax benefits that you were trying to do with all those tax deductible expenses and stuff. And so you got to really watch out. You got to, learn how to use QuickBooks, learn how the business works, what's deductible, what's not. There's a lot of things that you can deduct for. Even just being a guitar teacher who has students come to my house, because my studio is 29% of the square footage of my home. If I buy fertilizer for my lawn, I can claim 29% of that as a business expense.
Right.
Same thing with the heating bill or the electricity, or if the house gets painted. Those are improvements to your place of business that can count against your income as an artist. And as long as you're reporting both sides, the income and the expenses, two things happen. One, your taxes get lower. And two, tying in with the earlier part of our discussion, you establish the legitimacy of your business, which will eventually help, hopefully, firewall you off from any potential liabilities, lawsuit wise, or, anything like that. So honestly, it's super boring. And I'm sure that one of the reasons why a lot of artists fail is that it's not sexy dealing with,
It's not.
the finances and stuff, but it's absolutely critical to you surviving long enough for you to go up the ladder of quote success or whatever. And, because really it's just a question of survival as an artist. Like, can you stick it out long enough for some of your competitors to quit and get day jobs, or can you stick it out long enough to hone your skills, to be good enough to make quality music and start to get noticed and start to be able to raise your rates up and, legitimately be recognized as an industry leader, or, just somebody that can be trusted with a multi-million-dollar film score. That stuff takes time. And time, you need an infrastructure around that. So that's a very long way of answering that. Yes, I've had a CPA for over 20 years and, learned QuickBooks back when I was in a band. We were a corporation. We had a van, a trailer, a merch guy, and a door guy to make sure that the bar was not skimming off of us and stuff like that. But, now as a one person, composing team here, I've got a CPA, but I still do all the data entry into QuickBooks myself. I have an attorney in New York who is, specializes in the film world and in music world. So any kind of minor licensing deal where it's just a sync and master license, say like a local production company approaches me for a commercial, it's just, I'm going to retain publishing and artist side of the copy. So I'll retain all ownership of the music and the master and everything, but they just want to use it for a year, clean, cut and dry. I can take care of that kind of a contract without involving an attorney typically. But for the bigger deals, I would always go ahead and pony up the money, even if it would wipe out, a significant portion of my income on the thing, just to make sure, that I was doing my due diligence and that I wasn't shooting myself in the foot or handing over anything or leaving any money on the table,
Right. Well, and then those legal expenses can be written off.
Yeah, and they can be written off. And the other thing too is that every time you pay, either a CPA to explain, you take a meeting with a CPA for an hour or something like that, it's going to be costly, but it's an education. And if you take good notes or, record it with voice memo or something and go back and record notes, that you just got an education, and you don't need to be taught those lessons twice. Just learn them once. Same thing with the attorney. If you have sort of a complex licensing thing where, like, I've done some commercials where, like, I've retained the master and the composition and stuff, but there's a holdback period where for 5 years I can't directly license that music to anyone else. Or maybe it's immediately accessible, like I can immediately license it to other people, but maybe not in their geographic area, or maybe not to their direct competitors, stuff like that. So anyway, each time you pay an attorney to do, some new clause in a contract, once he's kind of, blessed it and said, okay, this is good to go, that's stuff that you can kind of cut and paste into and out of future agreements.
Right.
I'd still always recommend the blessing by somebody who really knows what they're doing if the deal is in any way signing over any of your rights, or if the monetary values start to get big. But for little, $1,000 or $2,000 deals and stuff like that, just pay an attorney once to kind of bless your standard boilerplate sync and master type of license, and then just file it away, and you can get by for a while kind of doing your own legal stuff there. But the best advice is always to have somebody look over it. But if you're only getting paid $1,000 and your attorney is, $500 an hour or something like that, it's up to you to decide whether it's going to be worth it or not on a one-page contract or something like that.
But like you said, if you're buying that contract from the lawyer, you can reuse the contract.
Right. And, another thing too that will help is, even if you're eventually going to use an attorney, you're still going to want to read through every clause of every contract, mark it up with comments, preview, or, Adobe PDF, or, a lot of third-party apps are able to, you can put in little word bubbles, you can make little parenthetical remarks to draw your attorney's attention to it. Sometimes I'll do some of the early stages of comments with a client myself, just to take the glaringly obvious either misunderstandings or omissions in a contract. I'll get those taken care of before involving, an attorney, especially if it's an hourly rate attorney. A lot of times now, attorneys are kind of shifting to almost like quasi-management, where they'll take a percentage of your income rather than billing you per hour. And in that case, then you make them earn their money, make them do the Mickey Mouse stuff too. But if you're paying someone per hour, make sure that they're taking that time to do stuff that you can't do.
Sure.
Or if your time is limited, then you got to do what you got to do, and you're going to have to pay them to do all that stuff too. But yeah, you can save a lot of money by just, again, it's not sexy, it's not fun, but if you have an example of what a good contract looks like, and then you're given something that's got a lot of stuff missing, if you take an hour and do a little bit of cutting and pasting and send it back with some comments, a lot of times the filmmakers or ad agency or whoever is hiring you, a lot of times they're just kind of winging it, and they don't really understand entertainment law very well either. So you got to be careful to not just go ahead and sign anything they send you. Make sure you know what clauses should be there and shouldn't be there. Don't give away your rights in perpetuity if all they really need is exclusivity for a couple of years. And then you can just clear that up with a little holdback period, and then, retain your full rights. In a couple of years, everything will roll back to you. And, realize that selling the entire copyright to a song is like almost never what they really need, because technically once they buy the whole thing, it's theirs. It's like they wrote it.
Yeah.
They could rewrite it. They could re-record it. They could, they can do anything they want with it. But if they're going to do that, make sure that you get the going rate for that, which is way more money than most companies are willing to pay.
Sure.
So anyway, there's a lot there, a lot of lessons learned throughout the years. But
Man, this has been a really interesting conversation. We've gone pretty deep into like being a self-employed business person, teaching, and some of the nitty-gritty about taxes and finances and legal entities. This has been really cool, Matt. I've appreciated your time and being so honest about how you've learned these things.
Oh, sure. Yeah, it's my pleasure. I've learned a lot from other people who have taken me under their wing, and I feel like it's my duty to kind of pay it forward or pay them back. Really, it's not even forward. It's just, a lot of people help me out, so I like to help other people out. But, all this business stuff really needs to enable you to do what you love.
Mm-hmm.
You can very easily get stuck in the weeds of just reading a contract and the taxes and all that stuff. It seems like it's priorities a lot of times, but make sure that you prioritize your art and that you set aside time to do what it is that you got into this business to do in the first place. And just realize that you could run a ship-shape business that, won't lead anywhere if you don't also pay attention to the art. So you got to kind of keep all those plates spinning at once. But definitely, if you can pay a little bit more attention each year to your business and to your legal stuff, or if you can at least pay people who know what they're doing, you will be able to have more time to, work on your art, because you'll retain more of your money and you'll be able to stay in it that one extra year that made, your buddy who graduated from the same film school you did, maybe he's like, I just can't make it work financially. And meanwhile, you did your taxes right and you didn't have to pay as much and you can stay in the game. And then maybe that extra month or two that you stayed in the game led to you getting that phone call and getting that dream gig, that made your career take off. So
yeah,
pay attention to that little stuff. It's important.
It is. Matt, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. This has been a great conversation.
Thank you so much.
This episode of The Portfolio Composer has been supported by Dorico, the music notation software from Steinberg. Whether you're a composer or arranger, a teacher or student, working in music engraving and publishing, or working in producing music for media such as film, TV, and games, Dorico is the tool for you. Dorico comes in two versions: Dorico Pro for professionals and Dorico Elements, providing the perfect introduction to the world of scoring. Whichever version you choose, you'll be using software packed full of smart features that produces beautiful results completely automatically, allowing you to get music on the stand more quickly than with any other software. You can bring music into Dorico from your existing software using Music XML or MIDI, and you can try Dorico out completely free of charge for 30 days by downloading a trial version from dorico.com/TPC. Try it today.